Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre, and today we have the extraordinary privilege coming to us from New Zealand to be with Suzanne Hansen, who is the founding director of UFO Focus New Zealand, and who is the author of a, I believe, very profound book. We have been following it over a number of its segments. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Alfred. I'm very pleased to be able to talk with you this morning.
Well, thank you for joining us. And your new book, which has to do on the dual soul identity, and I'm just here just bringing your book up, is an extraordinary book. I'd like to focus on several aspects of it. It's called The Dual Soul Connection. And could you just give us a general overview before we get more deeply into particular aspects of it, how you came about to write The Dual Soul Connection and what is its general context for those who have not followed our interviews with you?
Okay, well, the Dual Soul Connection documents my lifetime so far of contact with extraterrestrial species, mainly the Greys, but some other species as well that have been on board their craft. The book I divided into three parts. The first part talks about my early life and what I went through as an experiencer, discovering that this was happening in my life and how I was able to relate it back to many things that had happened in childhood that began to fall into place. The second part of the book looks at some of the experiences and contact experiences I've had and sightings I've had, which I selected out of quite a large number of experiences that I have either full conscious memory of or partial or small bits of conscious memory of. And most of those we eventually investigated through regression just to see what additional material would come out, if any. The last part of the book documents some of the I guess you could call them prophetic things that the Greys have said, although I probably shy away from that word. But some of the things that they've talked to large groups of humans about that may occur in the future, depending on what we as a civilization do on our planet in the interim. So the book documents all of these experiences and looks at my viewpoint on them. At some stage, I wrote to Dr. Rudy Schild and sent him some of my material and asked him, as an astrophysicist, if he could comment on some of the chapters that related to physics and travel in craft. And Rudy wrote back and asked for more material and was able to tell me that he understood a lot of what I was talking about in terms of physics, because I'm no physicist and I'm no scientist, Alfred. So it was really good to get that confirmation. The book focuses really on the thread running through the entire book is this dual soul aspect that many humans have that I think I've tried to encapsulate a very, very difficult concept for humans, for us to understand as best that I can. And I've had enormous feedback from all around the world from people who have sensed this about themselves and have written to me saying this makes complete sense, and I feel that I understand now what has been happening in their own lives.
Yeah. Now, before getting into the dual soul connection itself. Um, just to simplify some of the action, as I recall, you were first as a child taken on board a gray craft where you met the soul of your future son.
That's
And
right.
then fast forward, you were pregnant and married, and then taken up again. And there was a procedure which was, I forget the exact technical term, but it was sort of the embedding of the soul
Hmm.
into the fetus of your son in your womb. Is that correct? Is that pretty
Yes,
much?
that's right. And I called, for want of a better expression, I called that procedure soul insertion, or merging with the soul merging with my body and the body of the child, the unborn child at that stage.
Right. Now, for those of our audience who may have not heard that before, could you just walk through with more detail what I just very quickly summarized, which was your life experience there, from your experience as a girl all the way through to your experience as an expecting mother, and the soul insertion into the
Okay.
fetus of your son on the gray ship?
Okay. Well, as a child at the age of 8, I was taken on board a craft, and I experienced what many experiencers these days talk about, and that is being in a room with a lot of children, of human children and greys and other species, where we were learning to interrelate and communicate with each other, but also to use a lot of mind skills. I was approached by what I call a senior grey, who asked me if I would like to meet another child. I said yes, I would. So I was taken down a corridor and waited in a room with him. And in a little while, in came two greys, and between them, they had a large, vibrant ball of blue light floating in the air between them. I recall being a little disappointed because I'd expected to actually see another child, but not a large ball of light. The grey then went through a process of giving me what I call bringing me up to speed very quickly, where he gave me 3 layers of information simultaneously. I describe them in the book separately because it's really the only way to do it. But all of those layers, 3 layers, arrived in my mind simultaneously or a split second apart. The first told me, okay, this is a child, we want you to meet them, there's a reason why, don't be afraid. The second gave me a huge amount of in-depth information about the child's future, how it would be part of 3 waves of humans coming to the planet to work at this point in time in the future. That he would be a member of the 3rd wave. Excuse me. So there was quite a lot of in-depth information which I talk about in the book. And then the last little strand was that they wanted me to learn to relate to this child, that there was a reason for this, and then they just dampened everything down and calmed me down. Because when I was told this, that this is going to be your child in the future, this soul, this ball of light is going to inhabit the body of your child in the future. For an 8-year-old child, it was quite frightening, and I remember saying, but I'm not married, and bursting into tears and not understanding at all, and hence the 3 streams that put the information into the mind, then into the subconscious, and calmed the conscious mind. They then left the room to see how we would relate to each other, and after a few minutes, we were racing around the room as 2 children would do. So this ball of light was zooming around in the air, and I was chasing it. We related very well for a few minutes. Then the greys came back and said, good, this is a good start. This is going to work well. Okay, when you come on board the craft throughout your childhood and onwards, until this child is born as your son, you will relate to this ball of light on occasions and keep up this communication. So they took the ball of light away. I was taken back to the playroom. I asked if I could tell the other children about it, and they immediately just faded it all from my memory so that I wouldn't do that. It was to be kept concealed or quiet at that time. So as you said, fast forward to when I'm pregnant with my first child. I'm taken on board craft and down a corridor. I was very unwell during that pregnancy and they were concerned about that. So I was taken into a room, asked to get up onto a bed, like shelf bed, what I call a shelf bed. And a Grey came in, calmed me down, explained that there was going to be a procedure take place whereby they would bring the soul of my son in to merge into the body of my as yet unborn child. He reminded me at that stage, because I'd been brought on board with with not in my mind at that moment that the blue ball of light was going to be my son, etc. It was like they had just removed that because they needed to be able to bring it all back into my consciousness prior to this procedure taking place. So he did that, and then the Greys brought in the ball of light along with a lot of little Grey children who I was told would be a part of working with my son in the future. They had been brought in to witness this. They were very excited, and the air was full of thoughts and feelings and emotions and images and all kinds of things that I was struggling to comprehend. So he then slowed my metabolism right down and told me that if he didn't do that, it would be quite a shock to my body, because this soul had been enhanced by them. So it had a particular or a peculiar energy field. And so he did what I assume is like what a lot of yogis are able to do, where they can slow their metabolism, their breathing, their heart rate, everything slows down. I felt very cold. The ball of light entered my body and the body of the baby, and then my metabolism was brought back to normal, and I remember warming up and feeling quite normal again, but feeling as if I was infused with light, a very light and energized feeling. And then the children were taken away, and the procedure was begun to return me to my home that evening.
Right, right. Now we've had conversations about this, about the whole. This seems to fit in the rubric of what is called reincarnation. Is that a
Yes,
The correct
absolutely.
term.
Yes, that would be the correct term. And I had recollection. I have had recollection of being in other lives with this same soul. And when my son was 4 years old, he was getting into a bed with me one night at a relative's place, and he said to me, "Mum, I knew you a long time ago." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he said, "I knew you. You were there when I fell down the long hole." Now, some people have said, oh, he was remembering the birth experience, but no, because he was a caesarean birth. So I believe he was referring to a previous life where something occurred that he has had some memory of. So I think it's obvious, well, to me anyway, that we can incarnate with other souls that we've incarnated with previously anywhere in the universe, in any life form, to perform certain tasks.
right? Now, some of the information that that we've come across indicates that reincarnation is not something that is readily known or accepted in our human society. For example, the latest polls are for the G20 countries, which account for about 75% of the GDP of of the world, and this is where the quote the most educated people are, end of quote. Only 7% of the residents of the GDP of the G20 countries believe in reincarnation, and yet it seems that everybody pretty much who's walking around in a body who's not a clone or some strange thing is incarnating or reincarnating and is having a soul. Um, uh, did you find that? I mean, did your experiences confirm this? That everybody is an incarnating soul on the planet, that's what the purpose of being on the planet is?
From my understanding, my experience and perspective, yes. Everybody is incarnating from what Rudy and I call a greater field of consciousness, where we exist in some form, where our consciousness exists, everything that we have experienced in other lives. And from my own experience, I understand that we can bring some of that with us into a life. If we consider prior to incarnating, it might be helpful with us in the task that we might be going to do in that life, or the learning that might take place in that life. But if we look at history, and we know that in centuries gone by, people believed in reincarnation, and in many cultures it was a normal part of life. And it's only in more recent centuries that has reduced greatly. A lot of different cultures throughout the world, their belief systems are embedded in reincarnation as being part of their daily life. And of course, if we look at a lot of shamans and psychics and mediums, and a lot of people today who are exhibiting a variety of talents and have done for many hundreds of years, they are very well aware of incarnation and communication with the spirit world, people who've passed on, or people who are intending to reincarnate in some other form.
Right. Now, what is this great surprise? Also, however, and your case is one of the and your testimony and your experiences are a great addition to our knowledge, is that it's generally assumed that an extraterrestrial race such as the Greys do not have an operational role in reincarnation. Rather, that, say, a soul would do a past life review in the interlife and then go through procedures with their guide. And I'm just kind of looking at some of the learning that we found through hypnotic regression of soul memories of the interlife, and it seems to be directly from the interlife, in a typical birth down next to the womb of the mother about 3 months before, and it all happens sort of mysteriously and automatically, without the intervention of of a hyperdimensional or an extraterrestrial race such as the Greys. And we'll get into a second what type of Greys. I know that there are many types of Greys. Are the Greys involved in all incarnations, or was this a special group, sort of a special intervention experiment that they had?
Well, from my understanding, they are not involved in every incarnation. In my book, in chapter 9, called Soul Origin, I describe my own incarnation. Now, I had a partial memory of the events that took place at this time, which came to me some years ago, and that was one of the things that was explored in regression. And so the account and the information that I have is partially from this memory and partially from what came out in regression. And I talk, as many other people do, about a governing body that takes care of the spiritual well-being, or the spiritual processes that take place with souls incarnating on our planet. And I have been told by this group of entities and souls that many planets with civilizations on and life forms have the same kind of group that oversees it. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm just reading here. You say a group of other souls and a council of wise beings had met with me to help me plan my new life and prepare me for various tasks I would carry out in it. Is the council of wise beings the council that you're speaking of?
Yes, yes, I called it the universal governing body of this planet. And with what is happening, what I describe of the 3 waves of volunteer souls coming to our planet at this time, who've been incarnating for some decades now, this group has been working with bringing those souls in to perform certain tasks to help raise the awareness on the planet. And the Greys and a number of other species were, as far as I understand, were called in to assist with this process because they had particular skills and because they were part of the group of civilizations concerned about what is happening on our planet, what we are doing to our planet, and how what we do may impact on other civilizations around us. So they were called in because, as were other species, because they had particular skills. And one of the skills they had was this soul insertion and enhancing souls, educating souls in specific ways before they incarnate on the planet. So it's an interim step in the incarnation process that doesn't happen right across the board. It happens for a reason.
Right. So this is sort of a special soul incarnation program that you became a part of.
Yes, I wouldn't call it special. I'd call it specific. It's specific for a reason.
Specific.
Yeah.
Right. And does that tie into what we call, or what you call, the dual soul reality?
Yes. There's a smallish group of humans on the planet who have incarnated with this dual soul connection, or this dual soul identity. So they're able to tap into the grey or the extraterrestrial understanding and awareness, and particularly their analytical skills.
Right. So I'm sort of trying to go through the process here. You say that you start out with an entity called the soul source, which selects, divides, and then becomes a soul. Could you talk about that?
Okay, well, I described a feeling like a little spark of consciousness floating in this vast field with other little sparks of consciousness. And it seemed like a very restful, quiet, and peaceful place to be, until I felt what I describe as an electric tingle, if I can put it that way. And I became aware that I was being offered, or that I was being presented with 2 life options where I could incarnate into one or the other. And I recall examining both of them. It was as if I had been presented with a little bit of information about each of them, and I could feel certain aspects of that future life. I could feel how the vibe of that life affected me as this little spark of consciousness, and I could feel myself being drawn to one rather than the other. So once that intent was expressed, if I can put it that way, by my spark of consciousness, and I gained a preference of one over the other, then I felt drawn to that, and I found myself then being drawn into the presence of other souls that would be a part of that life and would be a part of going through that life with me for some reason. So there was this little group of souls who we would be connected in that life, and it would just seem to suddenly come close to me, as if we were all moving together towards a destiny or a point, step by step.
Right. And then you talk about conferring with a spiritual universal governing body.
Yes, that's the little bit of memory that I had some years ago, where I had this, like a flashback memory of being a purple ball of light, and I had no eyes, no mouth, no ears, no physical form other than being a ball of light, but my consciousness was such that I could communicate with these other entities or souls around me, and they could communicate with me. And I had this awareness that I was a purple ball of light. Next to me was a blue ball of light, and in front of us, in this vast, peaceful white space, was this collection of souls and entities, greys, and other wise-looking beings that were presenting themselves in a human form. And a discussion took place in which I took very little part. It was actually this blue ball of light, which I now know, of course, was the soul that became my son. And this ball of light seemed to be doing most of the communication, and I felt as if it was infinitely more wise and more experienced than I was. And there was some discussion taking place as to what this life would entail, and what, if I just chose it and decided to incarnate as a human, what would be expected of me in this life, what the tasks were, what I would personally want to achieve. And there was some discussion taking place as to whether I was equipped enough to be able to do this. The decision was made that I was. And when I expressed that intent, I felt my form change. So this ball of light seemed to become more dense. It was as if it began to take on a persona or a slightly different form electrically, if I can put it that way. And I'm no scientist, but that's how I would describe it. And that I was told that there would be an interim step at this point. I would not just then incarnate into an available baby or whatever and become a human in this life. There would be an interim step that would take place that would assist me in this life and with the tasks that I had agreed to do.
Right. So, but it seems that as though you and the two balls of light and the familiar soul you call the soul of your son, is that then you somehow ended up with an interplanetary species that you've come to know in this life as Greys. And somehow you and your son found yourselves on one of the Grey craft there. So there's
Yes, that's right.
there. Right. Could you talk about that?
Okay, so everything I have found, the expression of intent plays a huge role in any communication with spirit or with, ETs, entities. And so once that expression of intent, I was asked if I would accept this life, was I willing to accept this life, and I expressed that I was. And the blue ball expressed that it was willing to accept the role that it would take with me in this life. And at that point, all I knew was that it would be have a much more difficult task to do than me, and that part of my life's work would be to support that soul and others like it. So once that expression of intent took place, it was like instantly we found ourselves side by side, two balls of light on a grey craft in the presence of greys, and we were given instruction that we would be taking part in education before incarnating into a human form. We would be educated not only on spiritual aspects and background of the planet, but also in how to relate to these entities and what our tasks would be and how we would need to work together on those tasks in the future, and who else might be accompanying us in that life, other souls that would be a part of that great cog that keeps turning. So we were to receive an education as a soul before incarnating, but also we were told that once we did incarnate, that education would continue. So the soul would leave the body sometimes, come on board the craft, and have this more universal, greater picture perspective of what was taking place. The child, myself or my son, would go on board the craft in due course, and we would be educated as I have described in a playroom with other children, educated about interaction, how to use their technology, etc. But also we would be equipped with this, what I call the dual soul connection. So we would be equipped with this bonded awareness, grey awareness that we would take with us. And many experiencers today describe how when they're on board a craft, they see themselves as a human, they can see their body, then they come to a standstill and out of their body walks a grey form. And one woman has described basically just like her human form being like a coat that is just waiting there to be put on when she gets back. And I have experienced this myself of being on a craft and taking on the grey form and performing work on a craft that night, healing work or other things. Many, many experiencers describe this. And for a long time, I think we've struggled to understand the relevance of this or understand what this truly means. There's been a lot of discussion for quite a few years about people's description of this. And I think this explanation that I have, that I present in my book, of how we have this conjoint soul, if I can put it that way, that we have been enhanced in some way before we incarnate. And therefore we are able to make these transitions on board a craft, and in our day-to-day life we are actually able at times to tap into another awareness that can assist us with what we're doing at this time in our life.
Right. So you write soul enhancement and education, incarnating with a dual soul. There is to be a dual perception or identity, gray and human, and they explain why. We must be able to operate on two levels. There must be a closeness of two perceptions, and we're being told why this is difficult. My soul source had memory of having done this before, functioning with a dual soul, and so I had an acceptance of it without fear or doubt. Now, you say that there's a limited number of individuals who are incarnating with dual souls. Could you, going into your own history, uh, what is it that, why is it that some, I mean, do you exist with a dual soul, or is the dual soul an enhancement that happens when you're chosen for, say, a gray project? Does that make sense?
Yes,
That
yes. I
particular
think there's two things here. First of all, I'd like to say that these the programs that I talk about in the book, these education programs that are taking place on our planet and have been taking place for some decades now, they are very, very complex and they involve millions of people. But there are some within that group who, for various reasons, including genetic makeup of the family we have incarnated into, including whether or not we've incarnated with this dual soul awareness, we have received a particular education, and certain expectations, if I can put it that way, have been placed on us, which we have agreed to prior to coming into this life, but which now in the human form, the greys and other entities and species must work with us on a regular basis to keep that ticking over and keep us on track and on task. And I have memory of being with groups of up to 250 or more people on a craft, being taught things and being given warning about things that may crop up in the future, etc. And I know that that at this point in time, the greys are tapping into this awareness that we have and are monitoring many of the things happening on the planet through us, so that they are gaining a perception and an understanding from a human perspective of what is happening around us. And there are people in probably thousands or hundreds of thousands of people with this dual soul identity spread worldwide who have different tasks and roles to do and who can provide this feedback of what is happening from a human perspective. I was told that this is the first time they have done this with the human species, this dual soul connection. And you mentioned that I'd talked about doing this before with them, but that was when I was incarnated in some other life that I don't know very little about. It was not in a human life.
I see.
So it appears that there are any number of souls worldwide who have had, we've all had numerous lives, I believe, in different forms, in different parts of the galaxy, and not just as humans.
Right, right. Now, however, just to be clear, the particular dual soul program, education program that you and your son are in, individuals that are in that program or of that sort, you all are conscious of the fact that you have dual souls. Is that correct?
No, I think that there's a lot of people who are not conscious of that. They are doing the task that they're supposed to do. They're achieving what they need to achieve in life. They may be working in the UFO field. They may be entirely separate from the UFO field and doing something quite different. They may be working in science or whatever, medicine, you name it. But I think that there are some people like myself and many others who have this awareness that there's been something else going on in their life that they couldn't quite put a finger on. And as I said before, Alfred, I've had so many people writing to me from all around the world since the book came out saying, at last, I have an explanation that makes sense of what I have experienced so far in my life. And I've struggled to understand what this persona is that I am able to tap into or able to express when I'm on board a craft. So I think that there are a lot of people who are aware of it, who are gaining more understanding of it at present, but I think that there's just as many people who will come to realise it sooner or later. And I think once that takes place and this understanding of what we are experiencing and what we're supposed to do with it, then we will be able to better do the work that we're here to do. And I think that we're reaching that time on the planet where that's necessary. And I say in my book that I believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a lot of people en masse coming forward who've been hiding their light under a bushel and have not publicised the fact that they've had contact with extraterrestrials, who will come forward and talk about their experiences, and we'll get this critical mass of people who are talking about what they have experienced. And amongst that critical mass, there will be those who understand that they have this other perception that they're able to tap into and utilise.
Right. Now, just to be clear, there are lots of different terms here, and some people perceive of themselves as, quote, star seeds and have a perception of a multidimensional existence and multidimensional components of themselves, but and at the same time they don't have as detailed a specific memory of a dual soul with the Greys. And there are other people that have what we would call multi-dimensional experiences, where some more indefinite multidimensional energy or experience will happen to them that will be part of their awakening to the fact that there's more than just 3D. Those different types, is that those people are just not aware of their dual soul identity, or is that something different. That is, I'm just trying to make
Mm.
uh, distinctions here between the different type of multidimensional awarenesses.
Well, I think if any readers are interested in a fuller description of it, if they read my chapters that I wrote about towards the end of the book about the three waves
Uh-huh.
and the different roles that they have. For example, I don't use the term starseed or star child or any of those. I think that they have sort of had their day in because they've encompassed, as you said, so many different things. And I think now we're getting to a point where people are coming forward with more specific information for people to consider and see how it fits with them. And one of the things that I say is that there's been a group of humans, souls incarnate as humans, who have come here to open up doors in people's minds. And I think what people term as star children or indigo children fit into that category, where they have very ready memory of perhaps other lives where they've lived as another species. They have memory, conscious memory from those lives that they brought with them into this life, and they're able to describe having lived as another species. They're able to describe what their technology or their civilization was like. In the same way that some of them can describe past lives on this planet that they have lived to serve a particular purpose. So I think we've got a real mixture of things happening. We've got people who channel, we've got people who have very distinct multi-dimensional experiences with colour and light and energy. And I think all of these things are awakening us to a new awareness that the planet needs at this time for us to be able to move forward. But within all of that, there is this distinct group of people who have this dual soul connection, this dual soul reality, and that I explain in my book how that can be different from others, even within the group that I describe as the second wave of souls incarnating, which I believe I am part of, the communicators, very much talking about their experiences. And many of the abductees, contactees, and experiencers dating right back to the 50s fall into that category. And some of them will have this dual soul awareness, but not all. So we're all part of an agenda and a program that we have agreed to come and help the planet at this time. And I really think that we are sitting on a real knife edge at the moment in terms of our environment. Our civilizations are in chaos in many parts of the world. Financially, in every aspect of our life, we are going through huge change in our medical fields, in technology and science. And with that change has to come a change in spirituality and awareness, or we may end up using a lot of that technology in a very bad way. And we've been doing that already for a number of years, using technology to harm humans rather than to enhance and assist humans.
Right. Now, let's jump into those three waves. And I'm looking here at the chapter on the three waves. Looking at the first wave, you say the first wave is comprised of two distinct groups of volunteer souls incarnating here over a long time span. One earlier, the innovators, and one much later, the enlighteners. Their motto could be challenging the norm. Could you put that in context for us? What exactly is this all about?
Okay, well, this is based on information that was given to me many years ago by the Greys, and I first talked about it publicly in Australia at a conference in 2007. um, the thousands and thousands, possibly millions of souls have been through the process that I describe of incarnating into a life for a particular reason. And not only just for personal growth as a soul or a spark of consciousness, but for assisting the planet as a whole and assisting the civilization that is on it, if I can put it that way. We comprise the civilization once we incarnate. So many people working in science in early spiritual groups, I think of, some of the early spiritualists worldwide who were talking about concepts and ideas that were quite foreign to society at that time. But not only that, there were scientists and there were artists and all kinds of people in different professions who were very much innovators at really advancing technology and advancing our civilization very, very quickly throughout the early part of this century and the latter part of the last. And I think that running alongside those innovators were the souls who incarnated as what we call the star children or the indigo children, who have these very quite overt kinesthetic abilities, psychic abilities that they don't seem to be too concerned about displaying quite obviously. So they're here to open our minds to the fact that we are multidimensional, that we do have these talents, that we do have a lot of abilities that are exhibited on board craft by the ETs that we have the potential to be able to do as well. And so this particular group came along earlier on and then later on in terms of the star children and indigos to teach us this, to show us that these possibilities exist and to open our minds once again to these kinds of skills that ancient civilizations on this planet exhibited and which we have largely lost. So we're bringing that awareness back into our consciousness. That's the first wave, and the first wave comprised, as I said, of those two groups, one incarnating earlier, one incarnating later. And if you look at the way these three waves cross over, they actually cross and support each other in what is trying to be achieved in the greater agenda of raising the awareness and consciousness on the planet. The second wave is very much incorporates all of those who've had these kinds of contact with extraterrestrials in, say, the last 50 or 60 years, incorporating groups that I talked about before, the contactees, abductees, and experiencers. And many of those people still to this day do not realize that they've had that kind of contact, and many are just coming to realize that and piece together things in their life that they are shedding a new light on. So we've got this new consciousness that brings a new awareness, brings a new seeking in people to find out what has been happening to them and why. And a lot of people within those groups have, like myself and many others, conscious memory of being on a craft, experiencing contact with extraterrestrials, and they have been speaking about it publicly for quite a number of years. Many in that particular group were very badly treated by the media at the time. If we look back 50 or 60 years to when people were first starting to talk about these experiences, there was, first of all, there was quite a bit of enthrallment, especially with the contactees, because they were communicating with their they claimed to be very loving and peaceful civilizations. But then along came other entities that behaved differently, had a different awareness, perhaps operated differently, and there was a lot of fear surrounding that. I think that fear is largely beginning to dissipate as people gain a greater understanding and more memory of their experiences. The third wave coming that has started to incarnate back in the 80s and going right through into the future is the wave that I believe is going to have the most influence on the planet. And many in that third wave are now in their mid-20s through to their early 40s, mid-30s, late 30s. And many of those have been selected, if I can put it that way, within the agenda because of their disposition, because of their intelligence, because of their psychic abilities, their adeptness that they have shown on a craft to be able to utilize the mind skills that they've been taught. to be able to operate the technology, and many of them have psychic abilities that they largely keep under wraps. So here we have this difference between the first wave, star kids, if you like to call them that, and the children who are now in their 30s, who have these same talents but keep them under wraps and use them in what I call a very natural sense, whereby they're not exhibiting them necessarily overtly, but still they're using that discernment and awareness and their understanding of energy and nature, and things they've learnt on a craft, they're using it in a very quiet and discerning way to assist them in what they are trying to do, but also to assist them in the jobs and positions that they hold. Because this group, more than any, will get themselves into positions of power. When I say the word power, I mean a position where they will use power with discretion and with integrity. We see a lot of people in the world who have great power who wield it with like a big stick and use it in a way that is not helpful to humanity. But these young people will move into positions in science, medicine, you name it, education, right across the board. And they will use that influence in the future to make sweeping changes. Because I think if we look at our medical systems and our education systems, if we single those two things out and look at those, they are rapidly changing, both in the way that intelligence is expressed in schools today, both in the way that we record data and that we use data. That's changed since when I was at school dramatically, and it is continuing to change every day with new technology coming forward. The same in science and medicine. Our medical know-how and technology is accelerating at a huge rate, and therefore all the structures surrounding those professions or those areas have to change. Because as we change and our technology changes, the way we behave, the way we operate, and our spiritual awareness has to change with it. And this particular group, the third wave, will be the ones who will make those sweeping changes within society in a way that will be beneficial to humanity and to our environment and technology in the future.
So do I take it that you see yourself as a second wave and your son as a third wave? Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. And so judging from that, you could provide examples, very specific examples of what you're talking about. Now, how many individuals are involved in this first, second, and third wave?
Well, I don't have a specific figure, Alfred, but I would pick in the hundreds of thousands and millions. I think as the waves, the biggest wave from my understanding is the second wave.
Mm-hmm.
And the third wave is significantly smaller in the sense that it has been narrowed down to very much the offspring of people and some people in the second wave. And this, I discuss in my book how the entities, and when I use the word entities, I'm talking about the greys and the other species that are working with them in this agenda. They've gone through with large groups of humans what I call elimination processes, where they conduct various tests on board craft. And I've talked to hundreds of experiencers who've expressed memory of being tested in some way, either how to use a piece of technology or how to create something with the mind, how to influence something with the mind, all of the skills that many of us have been taught on board craft. And so groups of people are tested, and those who utilise the skills they've been taught or have gained a deeper understanding through their contact with the greys are then moved on in that particular agenda or group. And those who don't exhibit successfully what the greys or the entities would like them to be able to exhibit are utilised elsewhere in the program. So it's like nobody's skills are wasted, they're simply reassigned somewhere else in line with what their task is. So by the time you get to the third wave, you find that the numbers have actually decreased down of people who have specific jobs to do. So that still may number in the hundreds of thousands worldwide or millions. But there will have been an elimination process so that they are refining the souls down to those who can do specific tasks and those who can support them in some way in those tasks.
Right. Let's go back a second to the Greys, because uh, there there are, as you know, someone has mentioned there are many species of Greys. What, 150 specific species of Greys have been identified so far?
I don't know, Alfred, because I have absolutely no idea how anybody could come to a number like that unless they'd met them all or had some insider knowledge from somewhere. I don't know. I wouldn't want to put a figure on how many greys there are. I just know that that the species that I have had association with have been very positive, have been working on a positive agenda for mankind. I'm aware that other people talk about having had quite negative experiences with greys, and it would appear to me that they would be a different species to the ones that I have had contact with. That's all I can comment on that.
Right. Now, one specific species that I have come across research and reports that are quite negative proceed from Draco. The Draco, excuse me, the are allied with the Draco reptilians, and that's the Orion Greys that were involved, have been involved with the various abduction programs that are associated with the U.S. military under treaties, secret treaties going back to the 1930s, both with the Americans and with the Germans, with the Third Reich, the Nazi government in the 1930s. Do do the Greys that you deal with it? This is just to get some concept. Did did you ever come across information about their having secret treaties with any earthly government?
Yes, I don't use the word treaties, but in one of the latter chapters in the book, I talk about being at an underground base with a very large group of hundreds of people attending a lecture at which there were greys and both greys and humans in the chain of command, if I can put it that way, who were in charge and who were addressing the group. And they made reference to agreements that had been made between different species, humans and different species in the past, some of which were successful and some which were not. But quite clearly there was cooperation going on between the greys that I have had contact with and a particular group of humans. I never got the feeling that this particular group was a military group. I felt at all times that they were some other group and particularly involved a lot of scientists. I have never seen a reptilian or had any contact with a reptilian, and nor have I ever in my recollection heard a grey making any reference to them. I have seen mantis entities, and I've seen quite a number of grey and other species mixtures. What I call the ancient bloodstock of the greys, the very, very lined entities, I've seen mixtures of those, and I have seen mixtures of what appears to be greys and mantis. But when I say mixture, it's more the whole dual soul thing I'm talking about, where I have seen them transform from between one and the other while they were performing a task, and they told me they were utilising the awareness and intelligence of each of the species that formed their makeup. But no, I haven't actually had any contact with reptilians at all.
Right, right. And, and so did you ever come across what the history of the Greys are and how they might have become involved in this very advanced sort of sole caretaker species evolution role that they have?
I have not been given detailed information about the origin of that particular species that I'm in contact with, other than the fact that they have told me that they have very large ships and they basically are in space most of the time. They have not mentioned to me a home planet. They have mentioned that they have, but like cities in space, that they travel from one place to another to perform various tasks. Um, the particular species that I have contact with have shown me that they can transform into different forms. So I've seen them transforming, as I just described, between mantis and grey, but I've also seen them transform into what people might describe as a light being. And I sometimes smile inwardly when I hear people say, oh, the greys are bad, these ones are good, these ones are bad, these ones are light beings, so they're much better because they're light beings. But I've actually seen the greys transform into a light being form, and they said that this is how they appear in other dimensions when they work in other dimensions. So I think that we, over the next 10 years or so, I think that we're going to gain a much greater understanding not only of our own soul state and how we get here and why we get here and what happens to us after we leave here, the in-between state, as you said earlier, but also I think we'll gain a greater understanding of just who is visiting us and why they're here.
Right. Now, um, uh, you had mentioned you have a chapter called "The Dire Warning: Chaos on Our Planet,"
Mm.
and uh, which seems like the very opposite outcome that uh, one would want out of an education program. And uh, uh, you date it February 2010, and I wondered if you could go into that.
Okay, well, we're looking at an education program that might encompass millions of people, but that still leaves a vast amount of population on the planet um, who are not part of that. And I think what the programs are designed to do is to actually prepare people for open contact with extraterrestrials, but also twofold to prepare for what may happen on our planet in the future. Um, as a UFO sighting researcher, if I can just go off on a tangent for a minute, Alfred, um, we document in New Zealand UFO sightings that occur before, during, and after some of our seismic and volcanic activity. So we know that we have clear documentation that someone is watching what takes place with the changing tectonic plate activity. And we know that that's not us watching it, it's someone else. So I think that it's quite clear that the alien races have some idea of what is taking place physically to planet Earth and have concerns about our future. I also think that if we look at the Gaia theory of planet Earth, that it's a living entity, and planet Earth could quite happily survive without humans. All of the other species on this planet could quite happily survive without humans. They don't need us. We need them. And planet Earth would just go on if we all wiped the humans, if we wiped the human civilization off the face of the planet. So I have been shown at various times with large groups of humans futuristic images of Earth changes taking place on the planet. Very, very severe Earth changes. And it's interesting to note that not long after the experience you mentioned previously in 2010, where all of this information came out. Then we had the Japanese tsunami, we had the Christchurch earthquake here in New Zealand, where we lost a lot of lives and part of the city was flattened, and a number of other major earth changes worldwide. I think we all know that the severity of storms and some of the earth changes are increasing, and we have no power over that. We are at the mercy of that. Now, sometimes when a civilization is in disarray, as I think we are, we get to a point where we hit rock bottom, and probably all of us have been through that individually at some time in our life, where we hit rock bottom, and that's when we have our greatest realizations and make the commitment to make the greatest changes. And perhaps it is that these things will happen on our planet, and we will, as a civilization, get to the point where we realize finally and definitively that we have to make changes. And at that point, that is when many of these souls in this third wave that I've talked about will actually be able to achieve the most. And that is when the time is right for them to do so. And right throughout the book, one of the threads, Alfred, you may have noticed throughout the book, is my talking about timing, how timing is of the essence. And nothing happens without a good reason, and things happen in a timely way. And as we increase our awareness on the planet, so will more information open up to us, so will more realizations open up to us, and then change will take place as a consequence. And knowing humanity as we do, that seems to be the way that we operate. We come to a point where change is forced, basically, and so we change.
Right, right. There, you. So, where do we stand on all of these warnings? Is this something that took place prior on a timeline prior to 2012? Because it says 2010, and so we've actually gone beyond that, and we're on a positive timeline, and it looks like these changes are not going to happen. Is that?
Well, actually, I was told about this many, many years ago, back in the 80s and 90s. We were told, groups of humans that I was in were warned then about these changes that would take place. And I recall on one occasion sitting with a group of people, and they began putting up on a screen images every few seconds. Up came an image, a futuristic image of disasters and earth changes, and then they increased them into what I call QuickTime, where there were several images per second. And Dr. Schild has commented about this in my book. In one of the footnotes, he wrote about this process that they went through of basically flashing these images at us, and we had been taught to absorb them at speed. And the whole room was, the whole group of humans was in tears at the thought that these things could happen on our planet. But as time has gone by, certainly in the last 10 years or so, we have seen these things increasing. We are listening to scientists telling us that severity of some of these incidents are increasing, and we are becoming at the mercy of our weather and our natural earth change systems. So are we at the end of that? No, I don't believe that we are. And on one occasion back in 1980, at one of these meetings that I was part of with other humans, we were told that the time would come when there would be huge groups of humans who would not know where to go geographically, spiritually, in any sense. They would not know where to go for help, and we would become basically borderless. And when this time occurred, then we were becoming very, very close to major changes on the planet. Now, if we observe what has been happening recently in Europe, and I've just come back from Europe and I've witnessed it for myself, we see what are basically borderless countries now, with hundreds of thousands of refugees streaming through those countries, not knowing where to go. We have countries right across Europe and the Middle East and other parts of the world that are in chaos politically, spiritually, financially, in every sense of the word. So these dire warnings that I talk about in this chapter are taking place now. Now, how we approach them, what we do with them, is crucial to where we go next, Alfred. I don't think we can make a prediction necessarily that we're in bad times or good times, or we're going up or we're going down. We really are being buffeted by natural forces that we have to deal with. Many people in New Zealand, for example, several years after those earthquakes, are still living in tents and caravans. So we have this situation happening worldwide, and the Greys said the time will come where a lot of your social network systems like Red Cross, etc., humanitarian aid groups will just not be able to cope. And in the newspaper here in New Zealand just yesterday, there was an article about how these aid groups worldwide, they are overwhelmed and swamped and they're not able to cope. So one of the things that the Greys and other species have been doing is taking large groups of people on board craft from all walks of life and instructing them on survival techniques and how to survive, and how to lead people and how to operate with people who are in shock. And I think I've devoted a whole chapter to that at the end of the book. So there are precautionary measures being taking place to preserve our species, but really it's up to us to make those final steps. And yeah, sorry, I lost the thread of what I was saying there, Alfred.
Well, you said that there are some precautionary steps.
Preparatory steps.
Yes, preparatory steps. Is that in chapter 37? Talk about that.
Yeah, it's one of the last chapters of the book. It's chapter.
Let's see. We have
the preparatory steps is chapter 35.
Oh, 35,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, let's go there and see see what it is that we're talking about. So again, you're on the ships, and this is where you're getting a great deal of your instruction, your education, and your insights.
Yes.
Right.
So on this particular occasion, I was amongst a large group of humans that were taken on a craft, and I was told that there were numerous large groups of humans being taken on board for the same reason. I was just part of one group that was taken on, and we were given instructions on that we would be lecturing to groups of humans being brought on board craft for a variety of reasons. And one of the reasons was was to help their communities. So leaders and people within various communities who were respected people and who had the capacity to be able to help others in need. And I describe what I'm still sort of sorting out in my own head how vast this is. I describe a procedure the Greys described as sweeping communities, where they have this technology that can basically instantaneously, by passing over a community, assess I'll say the energy field of people within that community, and assess everything about that person who is identified as having a particular energy field or aura or capacity. So those people were selected out and taken on board craft, where they were lectured to by humans, by our group that had been prepared for this, and talked to about how they can assist at times in the future when these aid agencies worldwide will be swamped and won't be able to cope with some of the things that are happening right throughout civilizations on our planet. And this may be due to war and chaos and political dissension. It may be to do with disease, such as the Ebola outbreaks. It may be to do with earth changes and volcanic and seismic activity.
Right. Now, in your knowledge, can all of the people who are brought on board for these briefings and sessions, can they remember them afterward, that they've been on board?
The impression that I got was that they wouldn't, but that we witnessed at the time, and we took part in at the time of putting into their minds what I refer to as thought seeds. So placing a pocket of information into the person's mind that's helpful, that is has useful information, if I can put it that way, that will be triggered at a time when they need it. So if they're in a community where there's an earth change is taking place or some catastrophe, it will open up in their mind at that point in time, and they will just know what to do, and they will know best how to help people. And if I can say, many of us experience that, where we have this innovation or this idea that comes to us naturally sometimes at a time of need, and we think, oh, where did that thought come from? And it proves to be correct, and we're able to utilize that thought in some way. So that's a parallel of the kind of thing I'm talking about, whereby people will have this little structure or this information in their mind that will be useful at the time.
Now, could I ask you this? And I realize that this is speculation, but I'm just trying to understand my own understanding, and that is that your research is backed up by a great deal of research that I also report in a forthcoming book of mine called The Omniverse. And so the things that you are saying sound very, very familiar and plausible to me, because number one, I've read them in multiple sources of research, alternative sources of research, which are replicable and which are congruent. And number two, because I have an inner understanding of their plausibility. However, I do not have any memory of ever having been on a ship. Am I typical of a person that you come across and has conversations with you?
Well, it would be speculation on my part too, Alfred, but I would say yes, you could be typical of that. For example, on the same occasion that I've described on the craft, we had 2 lecture sessions. One was to people who were actually going to lose their life in the future in earth changes. And we know that in some of the earth changes and tsunamis that have happened, thousands of people have lost their life. And so I'm not going to go too much into that, because that would take us off onto a tangent as to where that leads. But the Greys were looking at inviting those souls, talking to those souls, and they understood in a soul state, in the state that they were brought on board the craft in, which is like an altered state of reality, so that they're calm and they're able to think rationally and reasonably, but not be afraid of their surroundings. They were able to address those souls and ask them to volunteer in the future. Once they pass over in these earth changes, where will their soul go? Does it want to go back to the field of consciousness and await another life? Or does it want to fast track and come back, incarnate quite quickly to planet Earth to help in the future and to be part of what we will be in the future and how our planet will be in the future. And that in turn would involve another whole education process for that group of souls incarnating in the future at that time. So that there were a number of lectures taking place for a number of reasons, and you can see how multi-layered and complex and multi-leveled this assistance program for our planet is. And another group of people that were brought on to be lectured to by humans was people in medicine and people in those support humanitarian aid agencies, because they will still be operating to the best of their ability. They may be swamped, but they will still be there and operating. And many of those people received what I call this thought seed, where they are given a little bit of assistance and information and insight and discernment that will open up at that time when it is triggered, and they will be forearmed and fore-equipped with information that will be useful to help other people.
Right. So this actually seems like, I mean, to put it in certain terms, this seems like the omniverse way, or the spiritual dimensions way of subcontracting, or of decentralizing the process of reincarnation, soul development, the dimensional ecology in the universes of how souls tend to, in an ongoing way, to planets. I mean, it just seems to me that what you're describing, that the other literature, what you're providing is a very vital insight into a hidden role that the Greys have into areas that have traditionally been called spiritual, but are part of our evolution.
Yes, I'd agree with that. Even myself 15 years ago, I would not, until I had this memory that I've talked about of interacting with entities and human-like beings and souls before incarnating, I would not have put ETs in that process of incarnating into this life. But that is how it has eventuated for me in my understanding and experience. So that's the role, one of the roles that they are playing in this whole agenda. And I know that the mantis entities are playing other roles. There are entities that, ET species that have been utilised because of their understanding of genetics or whatever. So they're all working together. The only one, as I said, that I haven't heard about working with them is the reptilians. That doesn't mean to say that they're not, it's just that I don't have any knowledge of that.
Right. What is your sense now, in 2015 going on 2016, as to the state of the planet, the state of evolution of humanity versus the state of urgency?
Okay, well, I think that there's a very distinct state of urgency. I'd like to say that up front. I think we're pretty much on borrowed time. And down here in New Zealand, we hear a lot about, we're closely aligned to what's happening in Antarctica. We've got our base down there. We work with a number of other countries down in Antarctica. And New Zealand scientists are talking about the loss of the ice masses down there. And we've got huge ice shelves that are the size of continents that are about to fall off at any time off Antarctica and will raise the sea levels worldwide as a consequence. So, we listen to scientists arguing about whether there's climate change and what's happening, but down here in New Zealand, we have the physical evidence of it happening down in Antarctica. There are parts of Antarctica that are gaining ice, but there are crucial parts that are about to lose it. And if they lose those massive continent-sized sheets of ice into the sea, it's going to have an effect. So where are we going from here in 2015? My most recent communication with the Greys was actually 3 nights ago, and I was told that that there's going to be a bit of a lull at the moment, that a lot of people like myself working in this area are just going to be put on hold for a little bit, because there are certain things being put into place before something happens on the planet. Now, I don't know any more about that. I cannot remember in conscious memory what that was. But there is something coming up. And I think we tend to compartmentalize our view of the world because it makes us feel safer, it makes us feel better. So we may just look at what's happening in our own country. For example, America is a massive country compared to New Zealand with a massive population. Our total population is just under 4.5 million. So our worldview is going to be very different from someone in America who looks at all of the things happening in their own country, and may not necessarily need to look outside of their country. But New Zealand tends to look outside because we're so small and far away from everyone. And if we look at what's happening worldwide, we are a planet in chaos. We can tune ourselves out to a lot of the things in the news or that we read about to keep ourselves feeling safe. We can compartmentalize what's happening and not only look at part of the picture, but if we look at the whole picture, I think it's pretty horrifying. And in the UFO field worldwide, I hear people saying all the time, we should have disclosure, it should happen now, it's got to happen now because we're ready for disclosure, mankind's ready for disclosure. Well, I don't actually agree with that. I think that many within the UFO field might be ready for disclosure. But if we look at the UFO research community worldwide, we are tiny if we put ourselves against the total population of the planet. There are people who've never heard about UFOs and don't want to know about UFOs, don't want to know about aliens or contact with aliens. So there's a great deal of work to be done to raise people's awareness, not only of what's happening to this world that we live in, but what's happening outside of this world that we live in. We have countries going out into space, and we have to ask ourselves, are we actually ready to do that? Are we actually a planetary civilization yet, or have we not sorted out our own backyard yet? Do we need to do that first before we take forays into space and take our aggressive and warlike tendencies with us? So there are huge questions cropping up on all levels about all different subjects at the moment, and we're not addressing very many of them. There are probably thousands and thousands of hardworking people in many different fields worldwide who feel a sense of great frustration that they are beating their heads against a brick wall. So where do we go from here? Well, shouldn't we be attending to the Mother Earth that we live on? Because without her, what do we have? Without our wildlife and without our natural areas and clean water and decent food to eat, what are we? We need to get back to the very basics of caring for humans and humankind. And our cosmic civilization beyond this planet can see this and are endeavoring to assist us in every way possible.
Right. So these are very practical, very, very practical concerns that seem to that many people I know here in North America, in both Canada and the US at this time, that are going through their political campaign and election process. We just had a process here in Canada where up to 68, a large percentage of the population came together to vote for strong environmental consciousness, to really begin to protect the earth and to move away from the old agendas of divide and conquer and warfare and
Mm.
environmental war and environmental environmental warfare. We just had we have an instance of a father and son prime minister where I could see that the father could be a second wave and the son could be a third wave
Mm.
because he's one of the youngest prime ministers in Canadian history. So I could, without wanting to project that onto these individuals, I could see that some of the profiles exist. However, um, I know that there's still some lingering suspicion around the Greys in some circles. And you write, however, some researchers and authors claim the Greys are, quote, stealing or capturing souls and are somehow cloning them as part of a negative agenda to take control of our planet and species. Some people call it the transhumanist agenda. Some people call it terraforming Earth for other species. Uh, and you write, I have never seen any evidence of this with this particular gray species that you have contact with. Could you go into more depth with that? That what you think the source of the benevolence of this gray species is toward humanity?
Well, that depends which. Sorry, did you say the benevolence?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, the benevolence of the grey species that I have had contact with stems from the fact that that for two things that I can mention. The first one is our nuclear explosions that we've had on this planet, and I think it's been 2015 or something like that. And of course, in amongst that is the two Japanese explosions in the war.
Uh-huh.
And write about that quite extensively in the book. I think that was a general alert to species beyond our planet that they needed to come to our assistance, but this agenda was in place and operating long before then. The greys that I've had contact with are only one of a number of species that are working together on this agenda. So I can't sort of single them out other than the fact that they're the ones that I have worked with. But I know that there are other species doing other parts of this agenda as well. The other thing that, if we look at a very basic reason why a lot of people see the greys as negative, particularly a lot of abductees, is for the simple reason that they are a telepathic race, like the other ETs that I've had contact with. And I can imagine that if people are in a slightly altered state or slip out of the altered state that they are often put into when they're taken on board a craft for ease of transportation, etc., then they may be quite afraid of what they are confronted with, depending on why they've been taken on the craft to start with. And when we're in an afraid state, we don't use our senses in a holistic way, so therefore it's possible that people are not picking up the telepathic communications and they see a mask-like face and that's about all. But I'd like to address what you mentioned before about some researchers who are saying that the greys are stealing souls. I'd just like to describe what I experienced with what I mentioned before about how they're enlisting souls. I've read some of the material that people have written about how they're supposed to be taking souls and cloning them, capturing people's souls, holding them in, goodness knows, holding pen kind of things. I've read about how they're holding them in holding pens on the other side of the moon, and there's a whole raft of things being said out there. And I'm not saying that all of that isn't true. I'm saying that I haven't experienced that. I can only talk about what I have experienced. And that is that on one occasion that I write about in chapter 35, where through the humans, we were offering these, through humans who were lecturing to these groups, we were offering these people the opportunity, these people who they knew would lose their lives eventually, and they, in their soul state and their soul understanding, were quite at ease with that. I remember describing in the book how I could register their human feelings coming through, the thought that they will be separated from their families, etc. But on a more universal level, if I can put it that way, their soul had this greater understanding that it's part of reincarnation, it's part of what they've agreed to do, that they will leave this life at this stage through these circumstances because of this event, and then they will go back into the field of consciousness, what people refer to as the spirit world, perhaps. And so on this occasion, the Greys were offering those people the opportunity to, when they pass over, to actually go to a Grey craft, and the conscious intent will take them there, as it did with me when I was incarnating into this life, rather than just returning to the greater field of consciousness to await another life. And so this fast reincarnation process, where they're gathering these souls and asking them if they're willing to be educated and then reincarnate quickly into life. This would indicate to me that we're not going to blow ourselves up, that our planet is going to continue, but life will change, and therefore these souls are being prepared for that change. The face of the planet may change. How we use technology may change. And the third wavers who are in positions of power, if I can put it that way, or in their professions, able to utilise their skills in specific ways, they will be a part of this also, of upgrading humanity. And so these souls are offered the opportunity to incarnate at a faster rate, if you can put it that way. So what you were mentioning before about how even reincarnation is changing, our understanding of it, and evidently even the way the ETs are involved in it is changing as well.
Right, right. And there's this other part of the book where you talk about having two minds thinking at once. So I'm just getting back into the particular now. You say one mind is Suzy, a human, and I'm thinking, have I got another body? And the other mind, Grey intellect, already knows that I've got another body or form.
Right, that's a description of when I arrived on a craft, and all I knew was I was there for a meeting. So I'm describing what took place before I think on that occasion, before the Grey form left my body. On another occasion, I stood in my body, but the Grey addressing me was able to address me as Suzy, but also able to address the Grey intelligence that is attached to me, if I can put it that way, in the soul connection.
Which is
Yeah, so there was a moment that I'm describing in the book where there was a moment of confusion where my human mind is thinking, why am I here? And, have I got another body? And then the Grey awareness or the Grey identity was registering the fact that the Grey identity had actually called a meeting. I think that's the one you're talking about. There's two that I just...
Yeah, and you say, he asked me to choose, commenting that some Grey identities opt to stay in the human robe body,
Yes,
but
yes.
still operate with a Grey mind. But I chose to present as a Grey stepping out of the human body. I now look through large cricket-like eyes, my limbs spindly and light. So, can you recall what do you do? Do you sort of just take off your body like a robe?
No, if I can describe it like this, it's like having a spirit-like form that is able to leave the body and manifest. And the Greys have said that future humans, I mean, we're probably talking many hundreds of years into the future, will be able to do this. They will be able to transform their bodies in these ways. And we're already seeing the beginnings of this being reported by many experiencers and abductees worldwide for many years now, where they report being taken by greys or other species, for example, through a door or through the wall of their home or through the ceiling or the roof. So we have this, this transformation of atoms or our physical status changing as we pass through a solid object. And the ETs obviously have been able to do this for a very long time. And as I said, I was told that in the future humans will be able to do this.
Now,
So this is just an example of how this soul entity, this soul identity, can manifest itself into a form.
right. So does this tie into what some people call moving through densities or ascending through densities or dimensions, like from the third density to the fifth or to the fourth?
I don't really know a lot about that, actually, Alfred.
I see.
It's
Okay.
just a transformation that takes place that I'm able to describe, and there's many, many other experiencers who can describe the same transformation taking place. And in fact, I've had a lady here in New Zealand staying with me for a few days recently who was the first Kiwi, the first New Zealander to go public about her contact with the Greys back in 1978. And this lady has always described to me, I've got a grey with me all the time, and I call it my hitchhiker. She's always called it her hitchhiker, who hitches a ride with her everywhere. And after reading my book and having some discussions with me, she realizes that what she has been describing as a hitchhiker, where she's able to go on a craft and walk out of her body as a grey, is exactly what I'm describing as the dual soul identity. So there's lots of strands of understanding and knowledge coming together at the moment as a result of me writing this material, and you know, it's quite exciting to see what people are reporting and describing, and how they're fitting it into their reality and realizing that there are other explanations from what they may originally have thought.
Right. Well, I really have found a great deal from your book, The Dual Soul Connection, the Alien Agenda for Human Advancement. We're coming to the end of this segment, and I know that we have gone through this before. However, because it's not complex, not complex material, but new material in areas that many of us have to stretch our minds to really understand. How would you summarize, once again, the dual soul connection, and what is the alien agenda for human advancement?
Okay, well, the alien agenda, I'll start with that first, for human advancement, is a whole collection of very complex programs that they have been running for many years now, with souls incarnating in the planet, onto our planet for various purposes, who have made this connection, as I have, with these alien species as part of their incarnation. And the dual soul connection is that some of those people have this dual soul capacity where they have been blended or melded or enhanced by this grey awareness and understanding and intelligence that they can tap into. And that intelligence can manifest itself, as many experiencers describe, by leaving the human body on board a craft and manifesting as a grey. And the greys on board craft are able to address both of those species, if I can put it that way. And I have seen that happen with other mixtures of species as well. This is a positive agenda, and it's very complex, and it's going to take time. They're not here to save us. They are here to work with our spiritual advisors or our overseeing universal governing body of our planet. They are here to work. They've been called by them to work with them for our advantage and our advancement. We are being brought up to speed because we are expressing the intent all the time to take ourselves further and further out into space. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us to gain the understanding that we are not alone, that there are many other species out there, and whatever we do will affect them. So there's this concept of oneness that comes through everything. We are all related in some way through the fact that we are universal souls. We can incarnate anywhere, in any species, in any form, not just as humans, but many of us are choosing to incarnate as humans at this time to upgrade this organic civilization we call humans that exists on our planet. And they described it to a group of humans I was in as we are in the muddy eddies of a river. They used the analogy of a stream or a river running freely in the center where the channel is. The water's clean and pure, running freely. But on either side, you're going to have the muddy pools with a bit of rubbish in it, where the water's a bit stagnant and nothing much is happening and nothing much grows very well, and existence is limited. And that's pretty much the kind of situation we are in, and they're trying to bring us back into the flow, put us in the flow of the universal energy, so that they are slowly preparing us for the fact that we will have this open contact in the future. It must happen if we are to advance and if we are to go out into space. We are going to encounter other species out there.
Right. One technical question. In all of your, both in putting together your book and in your experiences, did you ever come across the concept of artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence in terms of clones, do you mean, Alfred?
Yes, that is where you have advanced intelligence, not in a biological format like a gray or a human, rather in a machine or a plasma. It's sentient, but it's not organic.
Okay, well, the only thing I can align with there is the organic technology on a craft, and the fact that many times the craft appears to be alive and intelligent. It's endowed and imbued with intelligence. It can communicate with you and relate to you. And very often their computers, what I call their computers, they're more advanced than what we have, and much of their medical technology is the same. It relates to you, and you actually express your intent and express your emotions, your intent, and your intelligence to it, and it is all encompassing. That's the closest I can get to a description from my perspective of an artificial intelligence.
Okay. Now, how can people get in contact with you? I know that they can go to Amazon.com and get your book.
Yes.
I do, and which I highly recommend people to do. That's The Dual Soul Connection: The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement.
Yes,
However, go ahead.
They can contact me by email through either of the websites, the ufocusnz.org.nz website, and they can go to my website, which I'm just still establishing at present, which is www.communicatorlink, all one word, communicatorlink.com. And the book can be purchased there. There's a link to the Amazon Kindle ebook, and you can purchase the paperback version there directly from me. And I'd love to hear from anybody who can enhance my understanding of what we're all going through at this time, and who may like to tell me about their own experiences. I would really welcome that and cherish that.
Well, thank you. You know, we've been following your sharing of your life experience now for a number of years in its various stages, and we really want to congratulate you in having brought this to book form and in sharing such profundities about the human soul and how all of that interfaces there. You've shed a lot of light for a great many of us. So I
Thank
certainly
you.
want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfred. That's very good of you. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, good. And I hope that in the future, as events develop, you can join us um, as well.
Thank you. That's been lovely. Been lovely speaking with you today. Thank you very much.
Good enough then.
Thank you.
Thank you.